Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
This is Adam.
And I'm Jen.
And we're going to give you our hot takes on the game that we just finished playing, Castles of Burgundy. As always, I'm going to give a brief description of the game and then we'll jump in with our thoughts. Castles of Burgundy is a tile drafting game where each round you'll roll 2 6-sided die and then take 2 actions based on the numbers that you rolled. There are 6 different tile drafting areas on the main board that correspond to the sides of the dice. The primary actions you'll be taking is using one of your dice to draft a tile off of the matching area on the main board and then placing it in one of 3 reserve spaces on your board, or taking one of the tiles from your reserve and placing on one of the spaces on your player board that has a matching number as the dice that you use to take that action, with the limitations that it has to be placed adjacent to an existing tile and the region must match the color of the tile you're placing. The tiles do a variety of things. Building tiles typically provide you another specific type of action. Animal tiles give you immediate points based on the number of matching animals you've played in that region. Mines give you ore that can be spent to draft special tiles from the center of the board. Boat tiles move you up in the turn order track and give you good tiles that can be traded in for points and ore. Castle tiles give you a free action of any type. And technology tiles give you unique ongoing abilities or endgame scoring bonuses. When you fill in a colored region on your player board, you get points based on the size of the region and the round that you completed. The game is played over 5 rounds that are each 5 turns each, and at the end of the final round, the player with the most points wins. The Castles of Burgundy was designed by Stefan Feld and published by Alea. So let's jump in with our thoughts. Adam, let's start with you. Give me your take on the mechanisms of the game tonight.
The mechanisms are nice. They're not overly complex. There's not too much. There's not a big plethora of mechanisms. Basically you roll these 2 dice. That's always pleasant. And then it's you got drafting or put them out on your player board, just like you kind of just said. I guess the part that stands out to me to most is the spatial puzzle of the individual player boards. So I like that aspect of it. You're having to think ahead about the probability that your dice will show whatever face. So you want to give yourself the most options, at least that's how I try to play. So I'm working out the spatial puzzle of this particular tile and how that's going to combo up with other potential tiles, but also trying to balance that with giving myself the most options for future tiles. By that, I mean having the numbers themselves 1 through 6 available on my board, so I'm not necessarily stuck. So I like that little puzzle, and that's kind of what stands out to me as the most enjoyable kind of puzzle for this game.
Yeah, I'll jump on that. One of the things I didn't mention in the rules description is that you can use one of your dice on a turn to buy workers. And you can also get workers by placing a specific type of building tile. But basically what workers do is they let you change your dice. It lets you add or remove essentially pips or numbers from the dice so that you can kind of adjust what you can do with them. And so that, it's a little bit of an efficiency puzzle. Like there's sometimes you want to rush in and get something done, but you don't have the right numbers. You can spend your workers to do it, but then in the future, that means you're going to have to waste actions to get more workers. And so sometimes it's about the trade-off of like, I want to get this done now, but if I hold on and just do something else with the dice I've got, then I can save that action for later. So there's a little bit about trying to, I won the game tonight, and I usually do, but there's a little bit about, like one of the things that I focus on is trying to use the fewest workers I possibly can. Even if there's something I really want to get done in a turn, I try to just, use the dice I can and find a use for them. And usually you can, almost always. Maybe the end of the first round is the toughest because you haven't extended your board a lot. There's not a lot of tiles you're connected to. But that's when it's a little bit tougher to kind of find tiles that you can work with or place tiles on your board. But otherwise, you can almost always find something you can do with the tiles on your board. So I think the spatial puzzle and just trying to be as efficient as possible is pretty fun there. And there's a bunch more things I could say about that. But Jen, what about you? Anything that stands out to you as a mechanism here?
Yeah. We should start out with the fact that for me, Castles of Burgundy is my gateway game. It's the first strategic game that I really got into. And so I learned it from Tim and Danielle, and now it is definitely a part of the rotation. And people know if they allow me to pick a game, there is a really good chance that I am going to pick Castles of Burgundy. And I do that with no shame whatsoever. I really, really enjoy this game. Although Tim did tell me this weekend when I chose it, and he gave me the option, But yeah, that was really cool 10 years ago. I disagree because I only learned it 3 years ago. So there was no way that it was possibly cool before 3 years ago when I learned it. So period, end of sentence. It comes down to that.
No, I still love Castles of Burgundy. So I was kidding about that. I mean, you pick it a lot, and even tonight, like I wanted to invite you on the podcast since Chris was going to be out tonight. And I know that this was a favorite game. So I said, hey, Jen, if we pick Castles of Burgundy tonight, will you join the podcast? You're like, heck yes. I've been dying to talk about it. And that's awesome.
You put the carrot in front of me and I chased it right into your podcast is what happened. So,
but at the same time, after, 65 plus games of Castles of Burgundy, I still enjoy it. But it's not as exciting. It's not fresh, as fresh to me. Yeah. So that's why I kind of made that joke, but I'm still I always enjoy playing. I'm always looking forward to playing Castles of Burgundy. It's always it's a good one for me.
For me, I kind of look at it as like, if we think about like the middle of, I don't know, a flower, right? You come back to the middle and it's awesome. And then you go back out and you make a petal out of it. And that's how you learn a new game, like the Everdell that we're playing or the Artemis Project that we're playing. Like that's coming back. But I always want to come back to the middle because that's where the good stuff is. And so for me in the middle, maybe it's an Oreo cookie. It's Castles of Burgundy for me. So what I like about it, though,
I don't get the flower. Hold on, I don't get the flower analogy. Like, what is that? You go to the middle and it's awesome, and then you go build a petal.
I was drawing a picture like of a flower. I have kids, right? And so there's the middle, and you're there, and you're super happy, and you draw that circle, and you can draw it in whatever color, and then you make a petal, and you just kind of draw it out, right? And you play that game, but you come back to the middle because you had to close up the loop and come on back in. It totally makes sense, Tim. Just go on.
I have a kid too, and this analogy is just not working for me.
No, okay, but I like the Oreo analogy. I mean, sure, like the cream stuffing in the middle is really tasty, and then I guess you like the cookie on the outside. I don't know. Okay, let's move on. So what's one of the mechanisms that you really like?
I see how it's going to be tonight. I see you invite me on because you like me so much, and then you just give me a hard time. What I like about it, and I don't use the terminology correctly, but I like the layers. So we come into it and there is, I can draft a tile, I can play a tile, I can use my dice to get workers, I can use my dice to sell goods, and then discovering what that's going to do for me. But in the big picture for me, it's about the long game, right? And so you can do your first couple turns in that first round and have really high impact. So I tend to look for making some really high impact scoring when I first come into it. And that makes me feel really good because I love watching my score kind of creep up right then. But then thinking about the long game, like knowing that, oh, wow, I can score like 20, 30 points right off the bat because you get those really high bonuses being in round A, round B, when you finish off a specific section of one color. But in the long game, those numbers go down. And so now I have to think about my long game because the majority of the game, I'm not going to get that 10 and that 8-point bonus. So now my brain is working in the here and now while also having to think about the next 4 rounds at the same time. And I really it's an analogy for life, and I won't get into that because apparently you're going to give me a hard time tonight. But it really is. It's like, be in the here and now as much as you possibly can, but you have to have a piece of yourself thinking about round B and round C and round D and round E. And so that's what this game does for me. And I really like it. There's a narrative about it in my head as we go. And so I really enjoy it in that way.
Yeah, I mentioned in the rules description that the bonus, the points that you get based on when you fill in a color region on your board is based on the number of tiles in that region. And then so like on the player map, there's a nice little aid that tells you if you place one tile and fill in that whole region, if the region is 1 tile large, you get 1 point for it. And if it's 2 tiles, it's 3 points and so on. So it kind of escalates with the more tiles that are in there because it makes it harder to finish. But then you mentioned the round, basically like the sooner in the game that you complete a region, the more points you're going to get. If you complete it in the first round of the 5 rounds, you're going to get 10 points. The second round, 8 points. So it's huge if you fill in a 1 or 2 space region at the beginning of the game, because it's very easy to do, you're going to get a huge bonus of points for it. And if you fill in a 1 or 2 space region on the last round of the game, the first round, it's like 13 points for filling in a 2 space region. In the final round, it's like 5 points. And that's a big difference, right?
And that's the same reason why when we look at our boards, we get excited about it or we don't get excited about it. And I think that's because we each have our own strategy that we hope to default to because it's kind of where our brain feels really good about it. And so when we see our board, when it pops up, we either have that yay or nay based on that first moment. So I want to see a lot of little sections. Whereas when we play with Tim's wife, Danielle, she wants to see those, she plays the long game, I think, and she wants to see those bigger sections so I can see her reaction to that when that happens. And so it's based on how it makes your brain feel in that moment and how we kind of default. So yet another life analogy.
So yeah, that's one of the things that I think is also interesting here is that with the player mats, every player has a player mat that they're playing on. And there's there's kind of a basic player mat. So you can give everybody the exact same player mat in the game. And that's okay. It's fine. It's good to kind of learn the game with that. But then once you get past the starting player mat, there is a whole bunch of unique player mats that everybody has kind of a different layout. So you just mentioned you get that player mat and you can either say, yay, I'm excited about that or not. It's interesting to hear you say that you immediately go to like, okay, are there a lot of easy spots I can fill in? Because I think that's a great strategy in the game. Personally, I don't typically, I look for that. And when I'm placing my castle tile at the beginning and where I'm going to kind of start to spread from, I like to think about that. But I usually get more excited about the types of tiles that I have fun playing in the game. Like I like it when I'm playing the player mat that has 8 building tiles, because the building tiles to me are fun. You always, when you play a building tile, you almost always get another action to do after it. And I like kind of that comboing versus the player board that has the 6 technology tiles. Now, the technology tiles can be some of the most valuable tiles in the game, but for some reason, I don't have as much fun playing a technology tile that is just going to give me more points at the end or a change in my strategy or bonus actions, because I don't get to do something with them right away. So when I see that 6, that player mat that has the 6 technology tiles to fill in together, which can be worth a lot of points, that one doesn't get me as excited. So we definitely kind of settle on the way that we like to play the game and what gets us excited about it. And I think that's interesting. I want to talk about that a little bit more, but Adam, did you want to jump in with anything else right now? Because I've been talking for a little bit here.
So to piggyback, I had that 6 technology one, or at least the castle in the middle, and then 6 techs right around that middle castle. Mm-hmm. And it kind of does look like a flower, Jen, now that I think of it.
It's the flower board. Gosh. It has nothing to do with my theory. It has nothing to do with my theory, but it is the flower board. Adam, you are correct.
It's all about flowers.
Yep.
But yeah, I get excited about those buildings. It's nice, like you mentioned, those buildings are exciting because they do combo up, and that's one thing I enjoy about games. It feels good on the brain to get those combos if like you're making progress kind of situation, at least for me. And I did find that a difficulty. Now that you point that out, trying to fill in those texts and make them worthwhile, and that was something my brain was having trouble doing. So you make a good point.
The first time, I'm going to go into a little bit of a tangent here, but the first time I ever picked up this game, I had been playing some hobby games for a little while, but I was just starting to kind of build up my own collection. I just started to buy a couple of games, and I'd seen Castles of Burgundy show up on a lot of, favorite games lists and top 10 lists. And it came up for sale on Amazon for like $20. So I was like, okay, I don't know anything about this game. It looks ugly, but people are talking nice about it. So I'll go ahead and pick it up. And it got sent to me, and I opened up the box and I read the rules, and I was blown away by the elegance of the game system that you've got here. Just all of the little pieces, how they work together, the fact that like the stuff that you close out earlier is worth more points. You're kind of motivated to close those out, but of course they're worth less points because it's smaller sections typically that you can get in the beginning. Like, I love the balance of that. I love that there are 6 or 7 different types of tiles that all do their own things. And so every time you're picking one, you're making a choice between like, do I want to fill in this section, or do I want to get this extra bonus that this other tile gets me? And they're just like so many. I'll keep going back to the word elegant with this game because all the pieces just fit together so nicely. Now, I will say that there are some things that are not elegant about the game, and I'll circle back to those. But the gameplay itself is extremely smooth. And one of the other things that I think makes it feel smooth and elegant is that you're limited by the dice roll, right? So you roll those 2 dice, and there's a whole bunch of choices to make. There's, 40 tiles to draft from every round. And then there's like 40 spaces on your board you can put tiles. And so theoretically, that could be like a stifling number of decisions to make on your turn. But you roll 2 dice and you only have 2 numbers to work with. So you can basically ignore, for the most part, you can ignore every drafting section that doesn't match one of the dice tiles. So you can immediately say, like, I can forget about those. Let me just look at these other spaces. And then you can say, well, if I'm going to place something on my board, it has to be connected to one of my tiles on my board. So, at the beginning of the game, I only have 3 colors that I can even use. So let me ignore all the other colors that don't match that. So all of a sudden, you've turned what could be 80 decision points into 5 or 6 decision points. And it's just really, it's comforting to know that there's a lot of fun stuff to do, but you're a little restricted, and it helps, simplify your game decisions and not put you in a state of analysis paralysis, but it makes it easier to teach the game. It made it easier to learn the game. And so I think that is probably what Castles of Burgundy does. The dice themselves, which normally is like just a luck factor, and can sometimes be a big turnoff in a game. I think the dice and the way that those restrict your decisions is probably what makes this game just so perfect, and just kind of come together, and all the different pieces come together in the right way.
Listening to you speak, Tim, I was thinking, we are restricted to those dice, but there's also a piece of risk assessment that we have to deal with almost every time, because we do have those workers. And so those workers can take us up or down. And so it's again, like that life analogy is that do I want to use them now? Is there going to be a better opportunity to use them in the future? Will I be able to gain more? Am I going to be stuck in this place? And then when you realize you're towards the end and you've used all your workers and you're just kind of like stuck in this rut, it's interesting. So I do agree with you that there is that elegance to it, but there's also those rough edges that you kind of have to play in that make it different every single time.
Yeah. And the decision is also really fun because not only are you have to make the decision, do I use a worker now and adjust things, but it's also a little bit about like, hey, I've got 2 options here and this one is better for me, but there's less of them available. So if I take this other one, or, let's say there's less of the other one. So if I take this option right now, which is better immediately, Adam could steal this other tile from me, or he could take it before it gets back around to me. And so I have to also be thinking, in the short term, what should I do this turn? But also, hey, this turn I could take either of these 2 building tiles, which one might be better than the other. But if I take this one, then I'm using up the number that I could use for that one boat tile, which I really need before the end of the round to fill out a section, And so there is a lot of fun choices that come, even in your restricted choices, there are a lot of fun decisions to, kind of decide like, is now the right time to do it versus later.
And there's a personal level to it too. And we do know how, when you start to play together, because I played with Tim a bunch, Danielle a bunch, I played with Adam now a bunch. Sometimes we play in a group, sometimes we play just the 2 of us. And it just comes down to figuring out how, I've seen patterns in my other player. And I know what I can do to kind of block them at this point. I know what they're going to default to. So that kind of feels good too in my body when I'm like, I know what I'm going to get to do to just kind of mess their game up a little bit, whether it's to take their points down or just kind of like, mess up their mojo a little bit. And so that's a little bit fun about the game as well.
Yeah, you're mean like that.
Oh,
no, I'll back to that in a second. But Adam, you had something you wanted to jump in on there.
I was going to touch on the similar point that you guys talked about. Maybe it's a function of playing the game on Yucata versus playing it in real life. But how much, at least, so tonight we played on Yucata. It's a nice online games forum. But how much on Yucata are you flipping through other people's tabs and looking at their boards and seeing what pieces they might need versus, so I've never played the game in real life versus the game in real life, and knowing, just being able to look around and see what tile Jen might need or Tim might need, and doing a little bit of hate draft. So, recognizing the importance of a certain tile. I feel like that's something that I am missing for sure playing it in this form. And if I was a little bit better and more savvy, maybe I'd be clicking through. But just in general, the player interaction piece is a little bit lacking for me. And maybe there could be more if I was looking for it more. But what's your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, Adam, that I agree that I think Yucata restricts the player interaction a little bit, because you can flip, and look at other players' boards, but it's not the default, right? If you're kind of focused on your game or you're just chatting with the other players, your player mats up, and Yucata restricts what you're seeing of everything else. The game is not hugely interactive, like you're not making hate drafting decisions every turn of the game, but hate drafting will determine the winner of the game in some cases. And I've seen it happen multiple times. If somebody's trying to fill in that 4 animal section and there's 4 sheep that comes up in the last round, they would end up getting them like 17 or 18 points plus fill out their section. And you go first, you take those sheep, right? That happens all the time. If somebody's trying to fill in the 8 building section, and one of the things I didn't mention in the rules description is the building tiles are kind of interesting because you're restricted to having one of each type of building in the regions that they can go in. And so if somebody's trying to fill in that 8 building section, so they have to have one of each building, and typically they're not going to fill that in until maybe the last round. So that last set of building tiles comes up and they're the third player. Now you've got two players there that can basically take the only buildings that could let them fill in that section. And I've seen it happen. And if that player doesn't get those 8 buildings and get the 35-point bonus for doing that, they're not going to win the game. So it can be hugely interactive in limited circumstances, but it's not a type of game where you're like making decisions from the beginning saying like, okay, I see she went for sheep, I'm going to start taking sheep. Because it's played with 50 actions, five turns over 5 rounds with 2 actions each round. There's a lot of things that people can do to pivot. So you can't really block them, throughout the game, but there are some ways that you can start to find to really impact them, especially in the later game. So it comes up more so in real life than it does on Yukata, but it's not something that you're going to be dealing with throughout the game.
It's interesting that I've played it on Yukata and I've played it a lot in person. And that's how I learned was in person. And for me, it paves the way to being a very social game, because once you get to know the rules, you can talk. And there's a lot of trash talk when we play it, I know, involved with it. So that's really enjoyable. Online, it's a little bit different. I feel like there's a different level of concentration you have to pay. Like in person, I can kind of play through my turn and enjoy the dialogue that's going on. But like when we're online, we all put our blinders on, right? And we're all like, hey, person, stop talking. You must play now, right? Because otherwise the game will last like 6 hours and we all enjoy each other's company. But I mean, I know Adam and I, when we played a 2-player game once, we hit like the 3.5 hour mark one time because there was just 2 of us, right? So like when you talk.
Any listeners, okay, Castles of Burgundy in a 2-player game is never going to be a 3.5 hour game. Like, don't worry about that. The Castles of Burgundy, a 2-player is a hour, maybe hour and a half game if you're playing slowly.
But that's the difference. That's the difference between the online experience and the in-person experience, is that it's 100% when you're sitting there, you can chat and make it happen and move. But for some reason with this one, it seems to be that the person who is taking their turn 100%, and I have not found a person yet that can really socialize through their turns. You have to be able to give them that space to move on, or you will have that long game. And so it's really interesting. I like it, especially when you get in the 3 or 4-player games when we're playing online right now, given, the pandemic situation. There's 2 or 3 of us that can have like a great dialogue and it doesn't slow up the game at all. And so that's really nice when we're playing online.
No, I think I just heard you say 2 different things though. I thought you were saying in person that it moves smoother when you're being social, versus online it slows things down a lot.
Well, it depends how many people are playing.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if there's only 2, there's definitely a situation where it's not going to happen, because when do you talk, right? When's the situation to talk if you have to concentrate?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think like every one of the online platforms, I mean, Yukata is nice because it's free and it kind of enforces the rules and stuff like that. So that's our go-to platform for Castles of Burgundy. It's also it's a little buggy and it's pretty outdated and ugly, but it doesn't matter what online platform you're playing. It's never as smooth of an experience as playing in person. And except for, again, I'll get back to, because we haven't talked about the setup or the like mid-round, the things you have to do, the upkeep in between rounds. And that's one place where Yukata in specific helps, the game helps it move it along a little bit more. Anyway, bottom line is like, the online, playing online in any situation, I think it just slows things down, because even in this case, like you said, it gets to your turn and you haven't just been able to browse around the board. Now you have to stop. You've waited for the last person to kind of take their turn before you can even see what they're doing. So it slows things down a little bit. So is there anything else that you guys think from just a mechanism perspective that is, kind of unique here, or something that you haven't seen, or something that that you don't particularly like in the game?
I brought up my main concern is just the player interaction piece. I like maybe just a touch more interaction. I see it's there with a little bit of hate drafting. Mm-hmm. And again, maybe that's just lacking online more so than in person. And that's my chief complaint.
Yeah. Okay. So one other thing about the game, and I mentioned this briefly. So when I told you I got this game and I read the rules and I was wowed by it. So, but my first thing, and I just discovered Board Game Geek, shortly before using this, and I think it was one of the first posts I ever did on Board Game Geek. You could probably go find it still right now, but on the Castles of Burgundy board game, my headline was, "Wow, but." And so I read the rules and I was like, this game is amazing. But it literally took me like 15 or 20 minutes to set up all the tiles, because you have like 7 different types of tiles and you're supposed to turn them all face upside down and then randomly, place them out on the board. And then you also randomly place tiles in between each round. So you've got to do all that upkeep, all the starting setup and everything. And so I just do want to give one tip. Like, I think that is a problem. The game is always uniquely variable because of all that setup, because of all the randomness and the fact that you have to go through all that. But it really, I think it's for the weight of the game, I think it's too much. There is a pretty good solution that some BDD users, though, showed me right away, and that is that you can get some drawstring bags and just put all the tiles into those bags. And so then at the beginning of the game, instead of having to like sort them all out and place them upside down, you can just randomly draw tiles out of the bags, and that makes the setup a lot quicker. I still think that the game, like one of the nice things about playing on Yucata, for example, is that it does all that setup for you, and it does the mid-round upkeep. When we play in person, like I typically will go and set the game up for 15 minutes before everyone else sits down at the table and we're ready to play. And even with the bag, solution, it makes it a little bit easier, but it's just a little bit of a hassle. And then in between round, there's that big, like, okay, we just got to the end of the round. So now everyone has to stop and pull, 10 tiles out of every bag and place them all over the board and get everything set up. And I think this game is, is kind of unique in that situation, is that the mid-round setup or end-round setup is probably heavier than most games of a similar weight. And I think, if they didn't have all that, the game probably wouldn't have as much variance. It wouldn't have as much replayability. But I think it's worth calling out. It's not a particularly fun part of the game, and probably my biggest complaint about what the game has to offer. I would say until we get to the production section. So I think it's a good time to segue in. Let's talk about the production of the game. And Jen, let's start with you this time. Any thoughts on the production? You've played the physical version and you've played online, but let's talk about the physical version a little bit. What do you think about the production of Castles of Burgundy?
I, again, love this game, and I love all the upgrades that you have made, because that's the only real version that I have established, right? That's the only real version that I've had interaction with. And I think I talked about this on a past podcast, whereas after playing it for several years, I eventually, decided to dive in and actually enjoy it. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to go buy myself one. Tim says it's only $20. And you go online, you're like, where's my little silver ore? And, where's my neat little boxes to put everything in? And I'm going to have to pop all these out of the thing. No. But for me, I like the tactileness of the silver that you've gotten. So that upgrade makes a big difference for me. I really enjoy looking at the pattern. I like how the colors are, cooling. It looks, it's very thematic, but when you are playing, there's a functionality that's missing, because there are 17 shades of green.
There we go.
That's the only way to talk about this game. And everyone that I'm looking at them on the screen right now, everyone's hands like, yes, Jen, you're a genius. And I thought, yeah, Jen, you are a genius. And so,
well, that's not what I'm thinking. That's okay.
Okay, fine.
I was just thinking, when is she going to get to the color palette and all the problems with it?
But there's 17 shades of green. The animals are like this kind of neon green. Agree with me, shake your heads. And then there's the technology tiles, which are a yellow, but it's not quite yellow. It's got like a yellow that's kind of slightly attached to a green shade. And then you have your castles, which are 100% green, but then you can, walk it back a bit, and you have your buildings, which are this brownish, let's say it again, brownish. Oh, there's a green in there, right? Like there's definitely not just brown. It's got like this teeny bit of green in it. And so I was looking forward. Tim had shared with me that there's going to be a new version, an updated version. And so I was ecstatic to find out what that would look like. And, we've kind of like flirted with the idea of exploring that. I didn't know, I haven't really taken a good look at it yet. And so I was just kind of curious what your thoughts were on the new version that's coming out.
Let me start by saying that this is probably the ugliest game I've ever actually had the pleasure of owning. It's ugly. The components are cheap and low quality. The cardboard chits are thin. The player boards are little pieces of paper. This game is like the worst from a production perspective. And I still love it. I think that says a lot about the fact that I still love to pull this game out and teach it to new people. And it's probably, I introduced it to you as kind of your gateway into hobby games. And it was probably the last game I should have ever put in front of somebody and expected them to stay in the hobby, because it's pretty awful looking. You mentioned the color palette. It's bad. The quality of the components, as I said, are all pretty bad. So I was excited. So to circle back to your question about the new version. So Ravensburger released their 20th anniversary version, and it's kind of confusing because it's not the 20th anniversary of Castles of Burgundy, which I think is a 2012 game, but it's Ravensburger's, I think, 20th anniversary of their game division or something. So anyway, they released an updated, this was kind of the flagship game of their updated line of games. Everyone was excited about it. They teased a copy of the cover, which is very minimalist, very kind of modern looking. It just shows this, kind of cool cover with 3 gold keys on it. Okay, everyone's excited. And then they finally put it out there. Now, it's not that big of an improvement, unfortunately. The new version does look a little bit nicer. The colors are a little bit, just slightly stand out a little bit from each other. The colors and the art and the the user interface on the boards and everything are just a little bit cleaner. But as I mentioned earlier, like if I was going to go and buy this game today, I would buy the new version. But it's not a big enough an improvement for me to change from the old version. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it. I mean, it's an ugly game. That the game that we play with, the one that I know, the original version of it is extremely ugly. The new version is slightly better from an art direction perspective, except for some reason on the player boards, they decided to put the space where you put your dice is a picture. It's supposed to look like a painting of a man on a horse surrounded by a thick gold antique picture frame. And it's the ugliest piece of graphic design I've ever seen on a game board, I think, of all time. So that alone will prevent me from probably ever owning the updated version of the game.
They had to do something to outdo themselves with the ugliness. So somebody was like, we got to do something super ugly. Let's creep this in there and we'll keep our title as most disgusting game for some reason or another.
Oh man, yeah. So seriously, if they would have pulled in, get Ian O'Toole, there's any number of board game artists that could have come in and just made this a beautiful work, like for a deserving artwork for the quality of the game. This is a classic game. Like this game is, it's like next level. It's like this game will be in collections for generations at this point, but it could have actually been an heirloom quality game if you just put some, high quality art in it and just made it something that people actually wanted to look at and wanted to touch. And so what a disappointment. That's my feeling. Sorry, I went on a long tangent there, but that's my feelings about the new version of the game.
It's not a long tangent in that sense, because I feel like it's one of the most significant things we talk about when we talk about this game is the color scheme itself. And I feel like they just tried to stay so true to the pastures and the water and the grass and technology. I don't know why it had to be neon yellow, but it was. And so when you put that all together, this is exactly what came out. And I think there was this realism or this, very specific thought that someone had in their head that just had to be thrown onto the page. And so I feel like that's what we're looking at.
This game is so ugly and so bland that had you not introduced it to me, I would have never touched it. Like I would have, yeah, I've heard good things about it. I don't care. Like I looked at it and I was like, no, I'm not going to play that. It's disgusting. Yeah. And had you not, and even when you introduced it to me, I was like, Tim, I don't know how I'm going to get through this game. It's so ugly. But like you said, the mechanics of it and the gameplay of it, it's just so nice. Like it's so sad that it's so ugly and such a good game in there. Like, do something with this. Make it pretty, man. It's not that hard.
Have you played it in person yet, Adam?
No, just yukata.
Yeah. It's frustrating. Yeah, it's a bummer. I mean, like again, going back, the mechanism's fantastic. I love the game. I've played it a ton. I'll play it anytime. I think the only reason I ended up picking it up and maybe even falling in love with it as much as I did is because I got introduced to it before playing a lot of other stuff. So it kind of caught me early. Jen, probably same thing for you. I think, unfortunately, because of the production here, a lot of people are going to miss out on what is quite a remarkable game. So one other thing I'll mention about the production is I always like to talk about the user experience and the user interface. And I think it does do that right to an extent. And this will cover a little bit about, I'll cover this in the next segment a little bit, but the fact is that you can look at your player board and it will tell you almost everything you can do. And there's quite a few different things you have to know in the game, right? You have to know what all the different tiles do. There's like 7 different types, and many of them, the building tiles all do unique things. So aside from the technology tiles, it does a pretty good job of laying those things out for you. And I found after teaching this game quite a few times, Adam, this is probably, not as relevant for you because you've only learned it on Yukata. But if you're learning it in person, I can, as I'm teaching the rules, I can show you on your player mat exactly what what a tile does based on the iconography. And as you start to learn that iconography, you can reference it yourself. So for the relative complexity of the rule set, it does a pretty good job of laying all that information out for you and putting it in front of you. And I like that from user interface, and they do it in a pretty succinct way. I would say the one thing that it's really challenging for this game from a user experience perspective is the technology tiles. There are like 25 of them in the game. They're all unique, and the iconography is not that great for most of them. So I found for most people, for myself, I could stop referencing the rule book on the technology tiles after about the 10th play. And I played with my wife about 20 times, and she still asked me what most of the technology tiles do, except for the scoring ones are fairly straightforward. But almost the rest of them, they're just not that straightforward. And so they take a lot of learning and a lot of referencing. And that's a pretty frustrating part of learning and teaching this game.
What is nice about Yukata is you can scroll your little mouse over each tile, and it gives you a little summary at the bottom, a little sentence, what that tile does or what the scoring does for you. So that's a nice piece about Yukata for this game.
Yeah, that's definitely helpful in a situation like that. Yeah, other than that, though, I mean, that's kind of that's my feelings on the production. Okay, it's ugly, basically. Bottom line, it's ugly. All right, so let's move into, so for tonight, guys, we had a fairly long 4-player game of it, but a lot of conversation in between. But as far as the gameplay goes, any particularly interesting moments of the game that you wanted to talk about tonight? Anything that stood out to you?
For me, I guess it was probably going to be what Jen's going to talk about, not to steal her thunder. But I was hanging in there. I was doing all right. I was sticking with Tim, who already ruined the show and said that he won, so spoiled it for everybody. No, I was hanging in there for a while, and I was like, "Oh, this is going great." And then all of a sudden, I think round D, round 4 out of 5, boom, Jen popped up, and she was in the lead, like out of nowhere. So she must have had some big dramatic play. I wasn't paying attention to her player board, so I had no idea what she did. But something awesome, and that's kind of the cool thing of this game is if you plan it out right, you can rack up some huge points in a single round. So maybe Jen, tell us what you did.
Well, Adam, sometimes you make me wonder why I even bring the thunder. But
oh god,
what happened I didn't see it coming either. I just realized I had the board that has the 6 boats on it, and then it had and so I finished that off, and then I finished off in the same turn a 4-player spot with buildings. And so my points, I was like, oh my gosh, I was back with Tim's brother Steve. We were hanging out in like super single digits. And I was like, all right, this is going to be the game tonight. Sometimes you do. You just kind of get buried in the game, and that happens. And, if you have good company and you're still enjoying the mental process, it's all right. But I finished off those 2 sections and boom. And so, yeah, you did steal my thunder in that sense. But also, I looked up at the score and I was like points away from Tim. And I was like, yeah, it felt good. It was fun. I didn't see it coming. And then when everyone else, I was just kind of sitting there waiting for someone to notice, and all of a sudden everyone noticed. And they're like, yeah, that's always fun when you just kind of come from nowhere and, take over. And I did not win the game, but I did win the game. I'm whispering. I'm podcast whispering. I did win the game when we played in person on Saturday night. I killed it, and Tim huge into the 200s. So that was really fun. But yeah, it's fun when you really show up in the 200s on this game because you've really done some mental acrobatics to get there.
Oh, sorry, Jen. I asked the question about the favorite moment of tonight, which means we have to edit out the fact that you beat me on Saturday night.
Oh, yes. Yes, I see how that goes.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, right on. I mean, I think that is, this game, it's often called a point salad. I think Stefan Feld's games are kind of known for that, where you can basically get points anywhere. But I think this game is really fun in that you have opportunities to catch up because of, like you mentioned, you finished up that 6 island or the 6 water boat section on the board. So the game is fun. You can get ahead in the beginning by kind of optimizing and hitting a lot of those small sections. And then all of a sudden you can jump ahead at the end by, filling in a big, huge section. And so everyone's basically in the running for the game throughout the end of it. And I think I always feel that way. Yeah, this game to me was, there's a lot of fun combos that I managed to pull off, and it's always great when that happens. But this was a pretty tight game. Like Adam was right on my tail the whole, like within points, the whole first half of the game. And then Jen jumps ahead of us, and I managed to kind of like stay with her for a little bit. But it never felt like there was a runaway leader. Like anyone could have won the game, except for Steve. He wasn't going to win the game.
Steve had no chance.
No, I will give Steve some credit because Steve is not here. Is that Steve was like hanging out at like 30 points for forever, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he gained like 60 points, I swear to you, in one turn. So he's not sitting here. I will advocate for him.
Yeah. So anyway, I always have fun just seeing what I can pull off with the game. And whether I'm seemingly in the lead or seemingly behind, I know that the game could go any direction. So it's always exciting throughout the end, just because, things can switch up. And I did, we were talking about hate drafting a little bit earlier. I did hate draft a little bit with you guys. I was clicking around to the other tabs and seeing what people needed. And it probably kind of cemented my, finish in the end. So it's fun to see where you can kind of be clever and take from someone else and, add to your own empire there. So I don't know. I think that this game, I've never not had fun playing it. So that's, 60 something plays in for me. It's always a fun one. All right. So let's jump into our final question. Would you ask to play this game again? And I'll go ahead and start with this one. Yeah, I think what I'll say is I've played it quite a bit, as I mentioned. The production's pretty boring. And the gameplay at this point, although it's fun, it does, it's always a fun time. It's starting to get just a little bit tired for me. Like I still like playing it. I'm always happy to play it, but it's going to be unique situations where this is my game of choice to pick. But that being said, I think where it does shine is that it is a great, I wouldn't even call it a gateway game. I think it's a little heavier than a gateway game and probably heavier than I should have introduced Jen to, but I was just too excited to not, like when I taught it to her, I was like, yeah, Danielle likes this game. Let me just get something else a little bit heavier in front of Jen, so we're not just playing, hearts and golf all the time. But it's probably a little heavier than a gateway game, and it probably, maybe Jen can speak to this a little bit, but it probably wasn't the easiest to get into initially until you really learn the game. But that being said, I think it's a great job, like as you're trying to pull people out of gateway territory, and they're kind of excited about games, and now you're like, okay, now let's get into something a little bit more complex, a little more meaty. I think Castles of Burgundy is a fantastic game for that. I think once people kind of understand modern board gaming and have a good grasp on some general mechanisms, I think Castles of Burgundy is a great way to kind of show them how just smooth a game can run, and how the mechanisms, even ignoring the fact that there's almost no theme on the game, that the production's terrible, that just there are some great mechanisms and some really amazing ways to put together a game and just make it fun in every turn to be a fun and interesting puzzle. So I think Castles of Burgundy is a great intro to kind of heavier weight games, and that's when I'm typically going to be the one asking for this game. What about you, Adam? You have now played it probably half a dozen times with us on Yucata. Generally, would you request to play Castles of Burgundy? In
certain circumstances, I think I would request to play this game. For me, it's a very much a social medium. It was a way to hang out and BS with friends. For if I'm going to play like something a little more competitive, I guess my brain just doesn't fully engage with this one. Unless the competition's giving me a reason to get fired up about it, then I'll go wholehearted. But yeah, for me, I don't know. Maybe it is the color palette. I'm just like, how am I supposed to look at this for more than 5 seconds at a time? Yeah, for me, I don't think I'd request to play it. I don't not enjoy playing it. Every time I do play it, it's a great time. And I don't know. It's a good game, but would I request it? I'd probably go with something else.
All right, Jen, what about you?
Well, note that Adam's never said no, so we should throw that out there, right? There's a piece of that exists too, right? So, but would I request it? Yes, I love this game. I can't put it into words. Like, it was my gateway game, and it took, and I said it earlier, it took me several years, and that's because for a portion of time, Tim and his wife and I did not live in the same city. So when we met up, we were often on vacation together, and so we would play 2 or 3 times, and I'd be like, oh, please, my brain hurts. Let's just play cards, right? or let's just do something else altogether. We had puzzles for a long time. That was super fun. Ravensburger puzzles. And now I like it. It's different every single time. I like that we get to be really social during it, whether it is online or whether it's not, however we play it, whether that turns it into an hour game or a 4-hour game. It just kind of is what it is. And so it's dependable for me. It still challenges me. It makes me feel good. It's going to have a special place in my heart because it brought me into a place where all these other games now have popped into my life and I really enjoy them.
Yeah, I don't think you mentioned saying that it took a few years, or like a couple of years to get into. I don't think it was a couple of years. I think it was a couple trips though, right? And so we probably over, a year of several trips where I introduced the first time and I remember Jen's face, me teaching it to her, and she just was so clearly not interested at all. And it's a pretty long rules teach because there's a lot of stuff you got to show. But then she started playing it. I still remember after the first one, like the next morning, I was like, "Hey, you guys up for a game?" And she's like, "Yeah, let's try that Castles game again." Right. So, even pretty quickly, I was a little bit surprised, to be honest. I honestly didn't think that she'd enjoy it that much. And she kind of, asked for it again. But lately, it's like I get a text every 2 nights. Like, are we going to play Castles of Burgundy tonight? Are we going to play? Like, it's like, I think it's a great game to kind of experience that dopamine hit of, hey, I just did something clever. Hey, this turn was, and then it just happens, 50 actions through the game and 35 of them can be fun little combos that you pull off. And so it can kind of give you that little like excitement of like, I just did something cool. Even if I didn't win the game, I hit my goals. I did what I wanted to get done with this game. And so I think, that's why it's had some staying power for me. And I get the sense, Jen, that's why it's been a great introduction for you into the hobby as well.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thanks. That was a good discussion on the Castles of Burgundy. And I think that'll wrap us up for that conversation today. So let's jump in with our final question for the night. Is there anything that you guys are interested in this week in the world of board gaming? So Adam, why don't we start with you?
So one of my first Kickstarters was this game called Sweet Mess. It's one of the 16 or whatever that I'm waiting on. I thought it was cute. It's like how to bake. What's that? So it's based on a kitchen and you're gathering these ingredients and making this thing and you're getting points for making these little, I thought I'd be able to play with my daughter. And it's like kind of cooking. And so the components look fun and the Kickstarter looked fun. And this is going on like 3 or 4 years now that this game is late.
Oh, jeez.
And this poor guy, like I have sympathy for him. He's trying his hardest and he keeps putting out these very desperate pleading. He's got so many haters all over the internet, which you can understand as a Kickstarter guy who's having trouble delivering on his game. So just kind of watching this drama play out, I might just go read some of the Kickstarter comments just to see what's out there and see how much this guy's taking it. Am I looking forward to that? I guess somewhat from my drama sense wants to read some of that.
I have not, I've backed, a dozen or so Kickstarters at this point, and I have not run into any. I've had, several of them have been delayed a little bit, but for me, none of them have been delayed that far. So what possibly could, like somebody puts out a game and they expect to get it produced and distributed probably within a year usually. What is it that's holding him up for 3 to 4 years? What could have, and this does not look like a complicated game to produce. It looks like, some probably cardboard punch boards and a board and some cards. Like what does this guy run into that's slowed him down?
It's been like something wasn't quite right. There was something off with the game trays. So I had to go back to game trays and get that all figured out. And then some component was missing, a chef's hat, something about a chef's hat that had to go back. And then, of course, a coronavirus came and that's caused delays. But this was all, this was supposed to get here like Christmas of 2017 or something like that. So he's always got, a very plausible reason that stuff has delayed, but there's just been so many of them. It's, whew.
Is there now an expected release date? Do you actually expect to get it at some point?
He assures all backers that the game will arrive at some point.
Okay. All right. Well, good. That sounds really promising. All right. Well, I hope it's worth the wait. And yeah, by the time you get it, your daughter will probably be plenty old enough to play it.
She'll be like 25. Yeah.
All right, right on. I'll jump in next. So there is a game that I've seen making the rounds this week in media. This week was supposed to be the big European game convention. What's it called? Essen Spiel, right? Yeah. So that's like the biggest game convention in the world, and that would have happened this week. So they did like a digital version of it, so publishers could still talk about their game releases, and people could get online and do some plays of it. And the one game that has really kind of drawn my attention from the little bit of coverage I've paid attention to, which hasn't been much, honestly, is a game called Lost Ruins of Arnak. If you know me, if you've listened to my, like the games that I'm into, it contains two of my favorite mechanisms, which are pretty commonplace right now. It contains worker placement and it contains deck building. And I love games with deck building and I love games with worker placement. The two mechanisms just fit for me. Like they just make me happy. They both tend to have like a little bit of an engine building, a little bit of resource management and planning mechanism. But I got to say that lately I have been kind of put off by any games that had those mechanisms because I already have enough in my collection. I just don't feel like they're doing enough different to make it interesting. But this game, I saw it and it's just beautiful. The artwork is beautiful. It's just like, listen, we talked about Castles of Burgundy production all night long. Like I almost want to buy this game regardless of how it plays because the Lost Ruins of Arnak, because it just looks cool. The artwork is fresh. It's colorful. It just feels like a world that I want to live in. But I do happen to like those mechanisms, and I read that that's what it was based on. So I dug in a little bit, and it looks like great fun to me. I still have the concern about it maybe being too much like other games I've played, but every early reviewer I've read are just raving about it, saying it's best game of the year. And so bottom line is I'll probably end up buying it and pretty excited about it. I think it's probably going to just fit a sweet spot. I'm understanding that it has a lot of those, similar mechanisms that we played before, but done in unique ways that kind of, take the best of both worlds and combine them together. And I haven't seen worker placement deck building done. So I think it's pretty interesting. It looks beautiful. I'll probably end up picking it up at some point. I'm not going to rush to get it. Yeah, that's the biggest thing that I've been kind of drawn to. One little other note, I just read today that Stonemaier Games is releasing a second expansion for Tapestry, which the first expansion is I just got in pre-order a couple weeks ago. It's a very, it's a game that I love quite a bit. We just had a podcast on it and discussed it last week. So you can hear my thoughts on Tapestry, but I'm already excited about a second expansion for it. I think the first expansion had some really great things to it, and whatever they're going to do with the second expansion will be fun to just expand that world a little bit. So that was another piece of news I just heard today that I'm pretty excited about. What about you, Jen? Anything exciting for you in board gaming this week?
For me, what's exciting in board gaming is what's happening right in front of me. So
you're on a podcast. Yay.
This is the podcast. This podcast right here, this game of Castles of Burgundy. Two things happened, I think, this week that were awesome for my gameplay experience anyway. So that I thought was hip and happening was one. What's the name of that game we played? Artemis. Tell me what
the Artemis Project.
The Artemis Project. So a couple weeks ago, you introduced us to that game, and there was a lot of rules. That one was rough to learn. But I have got to tell you, as soon as we were done, I could not wait to play it again. And I wasn't ready for it that same weekend, but I really enjoyed it. There was there's the worker placement. It was just, I enjoyed like the banter that went on. There's a piece of it where we get to talk about going on expeditions together, and there's a trust factor involved. So there's a lot in that one. So I look forward to actually playing that one as a group and maybe doing a future podcast on it, because I really enjoy it. There's just a lot going on in that game. And so played it last weekend again, and it was a whole different level. And I'm hoping to play it again this weekend. And then another piece is that started a cooperative game with my son last week, and it was rough to get him through the first time. And it turns out that we had not interpreted the directions the first time correctly. However, we brought it over to Tim's house. Everything was straightened out. And it's funny because he was having a rough day. And he was just kind of like in a moody mood. And so we're like, hey, buddy, what do you want to, like, what can we do? How can we bring you back in? And his first answer was, well, let's play a game. Like, he wanted to be involved in what the adults were doing, and he wanted to play a game with us. And so I thought that was a really neat rebound moment, right? And the parenting world was like, he sees us playing these games, and I play age appropriate games with the whole family a lot, but he started to play with us. He's played Parks with us and really enjoys it. He's playing this Forbidden Desert cooperative game now and really enjoys it. And so for me, that's, that lights me on fire in a whole different way, knowing that he's doing something that's so, good for his brain and such an opportunity to build a relationship with him in that moment. And so that's what's going on.
That's great.
Nice. So Yeah, I really think, and I've started to realize this, like I've tried to get my daughter, she's just turned 9, and I've tried to get her into a lot of kind of modern board games, trying to, bring in lighter ones. And she's so cute. She wants to make dad happy. So she wants to play games with me, but I can tell that she just doesn't actually have she just doesn't want to spend an hour trying to like plan out resources and stuff like that, right? Like she's not ready to do Euro games. But I do think that cooperative games like Forbidden Desert are a great way to introduce your kids to kind of modern hobby board games. Like I think I wish I would have started there. And I still actually haven't found, because I'm just not a big fan of cooperative games in general. I just tend to prefer competitive situations. But I think if I really want to get her engaged with board games, I think cooperative is probably the best way to go. And I am very, interested in kind of finding that cooperative game that is a good fit for her. So I think that's great that you introduced Luke to it. And I'm sure that that's going to be a good fit for you. I wanted to call out the Artemis Project. It's not a super well-known game, not really popular. If any of you who are listening have, like Euro games, but like interaction, the Artemis Project is probably the most interactive Euro game. It's not a super heavy game. Jen mentioned there's a lot of rules. In Euro game world, it's probably on the kind of it's very midweight, probably less complex than Castles of Burgundy, to be honest. It is super, there's so much interaction going on there. It's so much fun. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of like, oh my God, you just took that from me situations, or help me with this. I really need you to help me with this. There's a lot of great interaction that happens in that game. And so that is a game, it was a game that I kickstarted and probably got delivered about a year ago, but I've never not had a fun experience playing with it. The game maybe could be a little more streamlined. The production maybe could be a little bit more, professional, but I always have a good time playing it. And I think that's a game that will stay in my collection for that purpose. So I'm glad you had a fun time with it as well. All right, cool. Well, I think that will wrap us up today. Thanks for the great conversations. You can find us on Twitter at BG_hot takes, on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes, and on BoardGameGeek.com under Guild 3804. Tell us what you thought of our takes on the game we played today. We'd love to hear from you. Until next week, take care, everybody, and get out and vote. You got one more day when this podcast gets released.
Good night, guys.
Thanks for having me.